Erased in plain sight, policing our existence in public space. Spaces in Nanaimo and across British Columbia have become zones of racialized, class-based criminalization, displacing, erasing, and punishing marginalized bodies under the guise of public safety. This isn't about crime, it's about control. It's a calculated power play designed to make poverty and difference invisible. Walk downtown and you'll see it. Fences erected around parks, signs warning no camping, benches carved with spikes, tents torn down before the sun even rises. In Nanaimo alone, an estimated 600 people, probably closer to 1,000, are living without a home, and another 6,000 stand on the brink of homelessness. Yet the city's response isn't housing, it's enforcement and erasure. Layered over this crackdown is a stark racial reality. Across BC, 40% of those counted as homeless identify as Indigenous, despite Indigenous people making up just 6% of the provincial population. Who decides whose humanity is protected in our public parks? City bylaws grant officers the power to dismantle shelters, belongings, and banish people from spaces deemed incompatible with official visions of order. In Nanaimo, fences have gone up around Wesley Street encampments. Fences are labeled as illegal even when courts have ruled otherwise. Justice Hinkson of the BC Supreme Court found similar bylaws in Abbotsford unconstitutional, recognizing the right to sleep and shelter in public when no alternatives exist. Nanaimo's continued enforcement, despite this ruling, isn't about legality. It's about policing bodies marked by poverty and race. So let's be crystal clear. When Nanaimo fences its parks, fines its unhoused, and tears down their camps, it isn't chasing criminals. It's chasing vulnerability. It's a power play that says, you do not belong here. And by rendering you invisible, the system can pretend the crisis doesn't exist. In this episode, we'll expose how public space policing in Nanaimo and throughout BC serves as the front line of systemic violence, erasing lives to uphold the illusion of safety. No sugarcoating, no compromise, because until we reclaim these spaces as zones of collective care and dignity, our streets will remain battlegrounds where the most marginalized are forced to fight for the right to simply be seen. 2. The invisible targets of public order. Beneath the rhetoric of safety and order lies a system that criminalizes mere existence, especially when you're poor, racialized, or queer. 1. Anti-loitering and safe streets bylaws. Loitering laws are built on vagueness, and that's by design. And as SFU geographer Nicholas Blomley explains, the term is massively subjective and can be easily weaponized, allowing authorities to single out anyone who looks out of place in public. In Prince George, enforcement data from the first 99 days of the Safe Streets bylaws reveal that 18% of complaints were about people's mere presence, and a staggering 36% of cases labeled unhoused individuals as squatters, a label loaded with criminal connotations and historical weight. 2. Criminalizing poverty and homelessness. British Columbia's Safe Streets Act doesn't just ticket panhandling, it deepens debt, stigma, and social isolation. A 2022 MPA study found the act inflicts severe physical, social, and economic harms on those it purports to protect, prompting a direct call for its repeal. Across Metro Vancouver and beyond, municipal bylaws outlaw sleeping, daytime sheltering, panhandling, and even public drug use, turning the basic act of survival into a punishable offense. The BC Civil Liberties Association Shelter is Survival campaign is fighting Vancouver's daytime sheltering ban in court, arguing it violates rights to life, security, and equality under the Charter. In Campbell River, anti-drug use bylaws impose $200 fines for public consumption, punishments unattainable for those with no indoor refuge, pushing drug use further underground and risking more fatal overdoses. 3. Hostile architecture as erasure. When you can't legislate people out of sight, you build them out. Hostile architecture deploys spikes, armrests, and intermittent sprinklers to make any pause in public space impossible for vulnerable bodies. Benches with central armrests stop you from lying down. Studs embedded in ledges make sleeping a physical impossibility. Sprinklers may run on timers that drench anyone trying to rest. These designs are not accidental. They're a systematic effort to render poverty invisible. Anti-loitering bylaws, punitive bylaws, and hostile urban design form a triad of exclusion, each bite-sized policy stripping away our right to exist in public. In Nanaimo and across BC, these measures aren't about reducing harm. They're about expelling difference. They institutionalize the belief that marginalized lives are unwelcome, unworthy of space, and ultimately disposable. 3. Policing public space, Nanaimo's own expose. Beneath every seizure, every ticket, and every forced move lies a blueprint of violence, one that treats survival as a crime and community care as an obstruction. Between October and December 2024, community safety officers and the RCMP in Nanaimo systematically seized personal belongings, confiscated cigarettes, and dismantled pop-up overdose prevention sites, even those set up by local health advocates that were doctors in full view of a fatal overdose crisis. On November 18th, doctors and harm reduction workers attempting to stand up a pop-up OPS at NRGH were met not with compassion, but with hospital security and awaiting RCMP officers who threatened force and eviction. CSOs, whose mandate should be de-escalation and support, too often act as agents of displacement. They issue tickets for camping in parks where no shelters exist, leaving people with fines they cannot pay and nowhere to lay their heads. Meanwhile, the RCMP have the legal backing to remove tents and ban individuals from city property, fueling trauma, insecurity, and distrust in any system that claims to protect us. Budgeting safety over support. In the 2025 operating budget, $215 million in total, nearly 40%, is earmarked for public safety, a category dominated by RCMP, CSO, and bylaw enforcement costs. This leaves public health and proven harm reduction services chronically underfunded. As Nanaimo's finance director, Wendy Fulla, bluntly admitted, policing and bylaw enforcement absorb more municipal resources than fire, parks, recreation, and the very overdose prevention programs our community desperately needs. When half of our discretionary dollars go to enforcement, what message does that send? That criminalizing survival is a higher priority than saving lives. Business and bureaucratic bias. The city's Public Safety Committee, the very body advising council on policing, bylaw, and community safety, is made up of 2 councillors and 9 at-large members appointed without any requirement for lived experience representation. The at-large seats overwhelmingly attract business association leaders and law enforcement insiders, while those most impacted, unhoused residents, people who use drugs, and Indigenous community members, are systematically excluded from the decision-making table. Meanwhile, downtown security plans cite consultation and buy-in from business improvement, but no process exists to meaningfully involve those whose lives are criminalized by these policies. A 2021 security plan briefing highlights wide-ranging stakeholder engagement, omits any reference to individuals living in encampments or peer-led harm reduction groups. This is the machinery of erasure. Patrol cars that seal off parks, budgets that prioritize policing over healing, committees designed by and for power holders. In Nanaimo, the system doesn't just fail to protect, it actively punishes the most vulnerable. And when policy-making rooms are cordoned off to exclude the very people these measures target, it becomes plain. The city isn't seeking solutions. Is waging a war on visibility. 4. Courts as vehicles of displacement. In British Columbia, the courtroom isn't just a forum for justice, it's often the front line of eviction. And for unhoused people, legal process becomes legal violence, rubber stamping erasure. Across BC, courts grant encampment injunctions in approximately 85% of cases, that is, before any full hearing or presentation of evidence. In practice, this means judges routinely authorize the removal of tent cities and survival shelters based on city affidavits, without weighing the lived experience, trauma, or testimony of those being displaced. According to data analyzed by researchers at UBC Allard School of Law and reported by Global News, courts overwhelmingly side with municipalities even when alternative shelter options are non-existent, full, or unsafe. What's happening here isn't neutrality, it's complicity. Judges have the discretion to pause, to demand more information, to acknowledge the charter rights at stake. Instead, they rely on narrow readings of trespass and public interest that prioritize city image and bureaucratic control over human life and survival, disregarding harm, upholding power. Let's be clear. Forced displacement does not restore safety. It destroys what little stability unhoused people have. Encampment teardowns increase the risk of overdose, violence, and death. Belongings are lost, medications trashed, and social connections severed. These harms are rarely, if ever, considered in court rulings. What is considered? Whether the city followed process, whether park aesthetics were disturbed, whether public nuisance complaints were filed. In short, survival is pitted against property, and property wins. This legal double standard allows municipalities like Nanaimo to weaponize courts as a cleanup crew, outsourcing the human cost of erasure to judicial authority. cloaked in the language of order and public interest. When courts greenlight evictions without listening to the people they impact, they aren't upholding justice. They're operationalizing displacement. They turn shelters into evidence of disorder. They turn survival into trespass. And they deny the most marginalized among us the basic dignity of being heard. 5. Human rights violations, space denied. When your right to exist in public is stripped away, your dignity is shattered, and your survival criminalized. Invisible belongings and identity. Across BC, laws governing sidewalks, parks, and even transitional housing empower authorities to seize and often destroy people's personal belongings without warning or meaningful recourse. For those living unhoused, those belongings are not mere possessions. They are the fragile scaffolding of identity, history, and survival. The Allard School of Law's research exposes how these seizures are routinely dismissed as property management, ignoring the human cost, loss of ID, medications, keepsakes. This legal erasure leaves survivors not just homeless, but stateless in their own city. NIMBY-fueled stigma. This hostility doesn't stop at law enforcement. Politicians in Nanaimo and across BC have publicly expressed open disdain towards people experiencing homelessness, language that licenses police and bylaw officers to treat these individuals like criminals rather than human beings. This stigma pushes people further underground, makes help harder to access, and entrenches the cycle of invisibility and harm. The not in my backyard mentality fuels aggressive sweeps and fines while pretending solutions exist elsewhere. Racialized over-policing. This erasure is not accidental. Indigenous and Black people in BC are disproportionately targeted by policing systems despite representing a small fraction of the population. In Vancouver, Indigenous people accounted for 16.93% of all criminal charges while making up only about 2.4% of the population. Nanaimo's RCMP and bylaw enforcement patterns mirror these provincial trends, reflecting systemic racial bias deeply rooted in colonial policing practices. When public space becomes a site where belongings are erased, identities denied, and racialized bodies criminalized, we are witnessing a human rights crisis unfolding in plain sight. This isn't about law and order. It's about who gets to be visible, who gets to belong, and who gets pushed to the margins or worse. Enough is enough. The policies that permit this violence must be dismantled, and those of us with the power and privilege to speak up must do so loudly, clearly, and unapologetically. 6. The human cost of erasure. When systems designed to manage poverty and addiction focus on policing instead of healing, the toll is paid in trauma, distress, and lost lives. The constant cycle of displacement, surveillance, and seizure fractures communities and shatters trust. People living unhoused or using drugs often avoid healthcare, outreach programs, policing, and community services altogether, not because they don't want help, but because past encounters have bred fear, isolation, and disengagement. Peer-led forums like Reddit and reporting by The Breach confirm this pervasive distrust is a direct consequence of punitive policies that treat survival like a crime. Criminalization drives drug use underground and forces harm reduction tools like clean pipes, naloxone kits, and safe consumption supplies out of reach. When police confiscate these life-saving items, the risk of fatal overdoses skyrockets. Police involvement accelerates rather than prevents violence. This reality turns harm reduction from a public health strategy to a perilous gamble. Court-imposed conditions such as no camping orders and stay-away zones are traps, not solutions. Violating these impossible rules when shelter options don't exist results in criminal records that deepen homelessness and entrench surveillance. Instead of offering pathways out, the system cycles people back into poverty, criminalization, and trauma. This relentless loop is well documented by legal and policing oversight organizations in British Columbia. When your right to exist is criminalized, every step toward recovery becomes a battle against the very system that should support you. Trauma deepens, trust fractures, and lives are lost, not to fate, but to deliberate policies that prioritize control over care. Ending this cycle means more than reform. It means centering lived experience in every decision, ending criminalization, and investing in community-led healing. Because if we don't, the human cost will keep mounting. One lost life at a time. 7. Reframing safety. What public safety must really look like. True safety is harm reduction, not displacement. Safety isn't about pushing people out of sight or shoving crises down the street. True public safety means reducing harm, centering care, and creating spaces where everyone's dignity and well-being are protected. Enforcement that criminalizes survival simply relocates harm. It doesn't eliminate it. Data reveals the disconnect. Expanding community safety officer programs in downtown areas has shown no meaningful reduction in disorder or improvement in public perception. According to Deloitte's report, the presence of CSOs in Nanaimo and other BC cities hasn't made people feel any safer, revealing a fundamental disconnect between policing efforts and community realities. Fiscal sense, enforcement cost versus harm reduction investments. Millions are poured into enforcement. Victoria's recent $4.7 million park sweeps alone dwarf the modest investments in long-term supportive housing. This isn't just a moral failure, it's a fiscal one. Punitive spending wastes resources while perpetuating cycles of trauma and crisis. Judicial caution signals change. Courts are beginning to hesitate before granting eviction injunctions, reflecting a growing awareness of the material harms forced displacement causes. This judicial caution opens a critical pathway for legal accountability and for pushing municipalities to seek alternatives that respect human rights. The future of public safety lies in harm reduction, not harassment, in investment, not incarceration, and community voices leading the way, not sidelined by bureaucrats and business interests. This is the moment to demand systems that protect, not punish, because true safety is justice and justice is belonging. 8. Recommended structural reforms. Number 1. Defund hostile enforcement, fund humanity. The first step is clear. Shift municipal and provincial budgets away from policing, bylaw enforcement, and hostile community safety programs toward housing, harm reduction, and culturally safe community services. This isn't charity. It's a necessary investment in life and dignity. We cannot police our way out of poverty. Number 2, legal safeguards for public space. British Columbia must enact a homeless bill of rights, modeled on Rhode Island's pioneering law that guarantees equal access to sidewalks, parks, benches, and other public spaces without discrimination. This legal framework would protect the rights of unhoused and marginalized people to exist visibly and without fear of harassment or displacement. Number 3, accountability and transparency. RCMP, community safety officers, and bylaw enforcement must be required to document every stop, seizure, and displacement event with publicly accessible, disaggregated data by race, housing status, and gender. This transparency is vital to expose patterns of racialized and class-based policing and to hold authorities accountable. Number 4, include lived experience. Policy and enforcement design cannot be performative or tokenistic. It must mandate the direct involvement of impacted community members, from unhoused individuals to peer harm reduction workers, at every stage of policy review and implementation. Without this, decisions will continue to exclude the very people they affect. Number 5, monitor and dismantle hostile architecture. Public spaces must be audited for hostile design elements, benches with spikes, armrests blocking lying down, sprinklers time to soak, and these features must be removed or redesigned to welcome, not exclude marginalized users. Urban planning can either criminalize or care. Number 6, rights-based eviction guidelines. Courts and city councils must only approve encampment injunctions when there is guaranteed adequate rights-based housing available for displaced individuals. Evictions without housing solutions are human rights violations, not community safety measures. The crisis in public space is a crisis of power and priorities. It will take bold, structural change rooted in justice, transparency, and the leadership of those most impacted to reclaim our streets and parks as places of safety and belonging for all. Until then, we stand witness. We speak truth and we keep fighting. The policing of public space in British Columbia isn't about creating order, it's about erasure. Marginalized lives are criminalized to make visible suffering vanish from sight. But safety, built on displacement and exclusion, is a false security, one that sets us all up for deeper harm. Public spaces, sidewalks, parks, awnings must be reclaimed as shared ground where humanity is recognized and nurtured, not targeted and punished. This episode draws on local evidence from Nanaimo, provincial research, and the justice system data. We are criminalizing survival, not protecting the public. And until that truth is faced and acted upon, the cycle of violence and invisibility will continue. It's time to disrupt the system that erases us and build a public space that embraces us all.